Hello and welcome back to another video in the College Life series. Today we will be learning about plagiarism. When reading through student assignments, lecturers and assistants occasionally find pieces that contain ideas or writings that belong to someone else. At times, those passages are just straight off copy and pasted without being properly paraphrased and referenced. In other cases, students copy and paste with slight changes, thereby assuming that he or she is off the hook from plagiarism. Now, students are often confused. What types of actions are considered plagiarism? How can one avoid plagiarism, and what are the consequences of plagiarism? Through this video, you will find out the answers. Without further ado, let's begin. By the end of this video, you will have learned the definition of plagiarism, what plagiarism looks like within the academic context, the various types of plagiarism, how to check for plagiarism, how to avoid plagiarism, as well as the consequences of plagiarism. You might wonder, where exactly did the term plagiarism come from? Well, plagiarism comes from the Latin word plagiarus, which means kidnapper. The Roman poet Martial first used the word around AD ad hominem in the context of stealing another person's literary work. He claimed that another poet had kidnapped his verses. Then the word was eventually adopted by the English language as plagiarism. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines plagiarism as an attempt to either steal and pass off the ideas or words of another as one's own, use another's production without crediting the source, commit literary theft, or present as new and original an idea or product derived from an existing source. In other words, plagiarism is an act of fraud. It involves both stealing someone else's work and lying about it afterwards. Plagiarism is all too common whether in showbiz or in politics. For instance, during the 2016 US election, Melania Trump and her speechwriting team faced accusations that a portion of Melania's speech given on the first day of the Republican National Convention plagiarized Michelle Obama's speech at the Democratic National Convention 8 years earlier. These days, a lot of celebrities also face accusations of plagiarizing artworks and even Instagram posts. Likewise, and as mentioned in the introduction, plagiarism also occurs within the academic context. Now, there is a more specific definition of plagiarism within the academic context, and it is an intentional or unintentional act of obtaining or attempting to obtain credit or value for a scientific work by quoting part or all of the work and/or scientific work of another party recognized as scientific work without stating the source appropriately and adequately. By this definition, I can highlight three important points. Plagiarism can be intentional or unintentional. If you accidentally copy-paste a sentence or paragraph into your assignment, that is still considered plagiarism. Secondly, even if you take only a small fraction of someone else's work, it is still considered plagiarism. And lastly, plagiarism occurs because we do not cite the source of a work. We will talk more about this later down the video. There is actually various types of plagiarism. Solistiano stated that there are four. The first is called word-for-word plagiarism, which essentially is copy and pasting the exact words of other writers without mentioning the source. The second is plagiarism of source, by which the author uses the ideas of others without clearly mentioning the source. Then there is plagiarism of authorship, by which the author claims an entire work of someone else as their own. And lastly, there's self-plagiarism, by which an author publishes their own work in more than one place. Recycling one's own work is illegal. However, it is possible to use old ideas in small proportions. Alternatively, one can also cite their own publication. Turnitin, which is the internet-based plagiarism detector, also created what they call Plagiarism Spectrum 2.0. This spectrum identifies 12 types of plagiarism based on findings from a worldwide survey involving secondary and higher education instructors. As you will soon notice, this categorization by Turnitin contains not only some of the more traditional forms of plagiarism we have covered in the previous slide, but also modern emerging trends in plagiarism. Three of the four forms of plagiarism we previously covered is also present in Plagiarism Spectrum 2.0, and these are the word-for-word plagiarism, the plagiarism of source, which here is known as paraphrase plagiarism, as well as source-based plagiarism, and there's also self-plagiarism. Additionally, this spectrum mentions several other categories, including student collision, which is when students work together to complete an individual assignment, and inadvertent plagiarism, which is basically source plagiarism but unintentional, and then computer code plagiarism, which is copying or adapting source code without permission from an attribution to the original creator, and then mosaic plagiarism, which is the act of combining various phrases and text from several sources without marks or attributions. And then there is the software-based text modification, which is using software to evade plagiarism detection. This includes copy-pasting from Google Translate a passage that was originally in another language. And then next there is also manual text modification, which involves manipulating text with the intention of misleading plagiarism detection software, such as changing one or two words within a sentence to its synonym so that Turnitin cannot detect any wrongdoings. Then we also have data plagiarism, which includes falsifying or fabricating data or improperly appropriating someone else's work. And lastly, we have contract cheating, which is engaging a third party for free, for pay, or in kind to complete an assignment and representing that as one's own work, such as using a ghostwriter. Now comes the key question. What can we do to avoid plagiarism? Well, there are basically three ways with the ultimate objective of providing attribution to the rightful owner. This includes quotation, paraphrasing, and summarizing. Now let's talk about quotation. Quotation is one of the most simple ways to avoid plagiarism, and it can be done firstly by copying the passage, rewriting it down, and lastly, writing the in-text citation along with the page number from where the passage originated from. If the quote is short, which by definition means that it is shorter than 40 words, then it can be incorporated into your paragraph. Conversely, if it is longer than 40 words, then it should stand as a separate block of text which is slightly indented, half an inch from the left margin, and without quotation marks. Here on your screen, you can find an example of a short quotation on the left side and a long quotation on the right side. Notice that on the left side, the quotation is situated within the paragraph, whereas on the right side, it is indented and separate paragraph. Now there is also various ways by which we can write in-text citation for direct quotes. We can place the author, date, and page directly after the quote like this one. Or we can have the author be stated early within the sentence, followed by a parenthesis of the year, the quote, then another parenthesis of the page number like this one. There are several notes that should be mentioned in regards to direct quotation. First of all, the quotation marks used in direct quotes is different depending on what type of English you are using. In American English, double quotation marks are used, while British English uses single quotation marks. In any case where there is a quotation within a quotation, American English uses single quotation marks, while British English uses double quotation marks. Another thing to mention is that it is very tempting to always use direct quotes instead of paraphrasing, but that should not be the case. Direct quotes should only be used in special purposes. That is to show an authority supports your point, to present a position or argument to critique or comment on, to include especially moving or historically significant language, and to present a particularly well-stated passage whose meaning would be lost or changed if paraphrased or summarized. Now let's move on to talk about another way to avoid plagiarism, which is paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is essentially expressing someone else's ideas and thoughts in your own words. When we paraphrase, the number of words used in the paraphrased sentence is usually similar to the number of words in the original sentence. If the number of words is much shorter than the original sentence, or in other words, we are only summing up the central point of the source, then we are doing what is called summarizing. Here on this table is a summary of the differences, purpose, and steps of conducting each of the three ways we previously mentioned. Please take some time to stop this video and read it carefully. Now, how do you check for plagiarism? It's pretty easy. All we need to do is use a plagiarism checker. At the faculty, there is access to Turnitin via the academic office. And from UGM, students and staff have free access to IMOS Plagiarism Checker. You might be curious, if someone does take part in plagiarism, what are the consequences? Let's find out. Here on your screen, you can see two examples of plagiarism in the academic context. On your left, there is a man named René Dijkstra. René is a former professor at Leiden University. He was accused of copying other researchers' work, as well as autobiographical details and poetry of other authors. René left Leiden University in 1997 due to this accusation. On the right is news of 48 University of Virginia students who were expelled due to Plagiarism Act in 2002. They were found guilty of copying material for their papers in a course called Physics 105. 3 of those 48 students had actually graduated, so they were not expelled, but their degrees were revoked. Just like those examples which happened in the US and Europe, here in Indonesia we have strict laws regarding plagiarism. The National Education System laws state that college graduates who plagiarize scientific work will have their degree revoked. Meanwhile, the ministerial regulations state that students who have been proven to plagiarize will either receive warning, written warning, delay of rights as a student, or cancellation of grades depending on the number and severity of offense. Yet of course, the heaviest penalty is still the moral consequences that come with such action. Don't you think so? This is the end of our video on plagiarism. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.